Hi, and welcome back to Healing Solidarity. In this recording, you'll find two conversations with me and two people who are thinking quite a bit about trauma-informed approaches to management and to meetings. It felt really important to me to share in this conference something about trauma-informed approaches, because a big part of what I think is coming up and needs to be addressed at this time, and what I think a solidarity that heals and justice could actually look like, is recognizing trauma on many different levels. So what we might talk about as our personal lived experiences and the ways that they intersect with and are framed by structural and systemic issues and harm, and how that impacts how we experience traumatic events in our own lives and might make things feel more or less traumatic for us depending on the privilege and comfort that we may have access to, and how systems like white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism impact us directly, are traumatic for us, and can impact our own experience of traumatic events in our lives. I think if we're not able to acknowledge those intersecting traumas and the impact on us as people, as well as on the communities that we work with and the people that we work alongside in our workplace, and name those, and bring them into a conversation about what equitable relationships between us might look like, then I think we'll always be hiding in a way from the reality of our lived experiences in the world. Because as you'll hear Suzanne say, most of us have some experience of trauma in our lives, of distressing events that happened in the past and may impact still how we live in the present, or of traumatic events that might be happening right now, a global pandemic being just one of them that's affected most of us this year. And it feels to me that part of how we navigate the different ways of working in this time is acknowledging that and making space in our practice to be cognizant of trauma and welcome an awareness of that into the ways that we work together. Both these conversations remind us to remember that our minds and bodies are not separate, that we're embodied beings, and that the responses, needs, and sensations in our bodies are something that it's important to pay attention to and not to ignore. You'll hear a bit about how we might do that when managing people in my conversation with Suzanne, and when holding meetings in my conversation with Eri. You'll also hear Eri mention Resmaa Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands, which is about healing racialized trauma. It's a book that speaks specifically to the US experience and to racialized trauma in that context, but that also has really useful practices and ideas that can benefit us wherever we are in the world when thinking about a trauma-informed approach to anti-racist practice and how that might shape our work in future. We also talk about the characteristics of white supremacy culture as outlined by Jones and Akun, and we relate that to a disembodied kind of professionalism that asks us to leave our whole selves out of our workplaces. For me, that's related to a conversation about decolonizing our practice in aid and development spaces. And as we jump into these conversations, I wanted to also refer to you to an article by Jessica Horn called Decolonizing Emotional Wellbeing and Mental Health in Development, African Feminist Innovation. That was part of a journal that we did with the Gender and Development Journal earlier this year called Reimagining International Development, that I co-edited with Caroline Sweetman. You'll find in Jessica's article lots of ideas about decolonizing our approach to wellbeing and mental health. And for me, this sits really well and is something else you can dive into alongside these two conversations that are about a trauma-informed approach to working. Enjoy. Hi, Suzanne. And it's nice to meet you and have a chat for Healing Solidarity about your work on trauma-informed management. And I think the first thing I was going to ask you is, what's that?
I mean, that's a really good question. I think for me, it's really some words that I've put together as I started to try to figure out the reality that trauma is not an uncommon, unusual fringe thing that people are experiencing.
Right.
In change work, the issues that we work on are intense and scary. And what I have noticed is that a lot of folks who come from traumatized backgrounds are really drawn to understanding power, like are really drawn to organizing, activism, charity, like figuring out how to change the world so that it is a more survivable place.
Right.
And that, in my experience, has meant that we're trying to change the world while also navigating our own healing processes. And workplaces are not, in my experience in the Western world, workplaces are not set up for folks who are experiencing the real, like, neurophysical impacts of trauma. The pain, the like literal physical pain that manifests from trauma, the inability to focus, the flashbacks, the like inability to be in your body and present. That's real, and that impacts the ways that we show up in our work. And managers don't have the support or the tools or the skills to deal with that. We're not social workers. We're not psychotherapists. We're not, like, many of us have acquired healing practices to support our management work or our change work. And so to me, trauma-informed management is like some words that I put to my own journey of trying to like heal my own body, my experience with Western medicine, and like learning that there are people who have trauma-informed approaches, and that is a space that I can actually start to move towards healing in, and bridging that into my management practices. It's like, how do we operate in reality as opposed to what we're trained workplaces are supposed to be like?
Yeah, right. I think it'd be interesting to hear, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about your, because we kind of jumped straight in there, which is but a bit about your sort of background or journey that's brought you to that point of having those realizations, which is certainly really resonant for me as well, about what we do in workspaces and how I feel it needs to change.
Yeah. I mean, how heavy do we get here?
How heavy do you want to get? Whatever feels good, like good in your body to share, right? Good in your body as well as your mind.
Yeah. So I came to organizing through work on my campus around rape, domestic violence, and sexual assaults, coming from a background of like ongoing domestic violence. And so organizing for me was about survival. And about healing, and about being in community with people, and moving away from the isolation and shame and fear around, I've experienced trauma, this is mine, I can't tell anybody about it. And trying to figure out how we build communities where people can move from the shame and isolation into power. And then I found jobs in the environmental movement, which was not that, which is still about, is a very different relationship to power and ability and emotions. It's very hardened. But also, when we're talking about environmental justice, when we're talking about the impacts of climate change, we're talking about really deeply traumatic events in communities, historic trauma, intergenerational trauma. So for me, that transition was really jarring and numbing in a way. It was like, oh, okay, here's this whole tool set that I have that's not welcome or normalized in this space, or sort of pushed off to the side. And as I moved up and started managing folks, I also started doing my own healing work around some chronic pain and PTSD. and realized that like there are these skills over here that I'm learning about how to take care of my body, spirit, and my emotions, and like reclaim my own autonomy and and interconnectedness. And these skills over here around like delegating tasks and writing campaign plans and doing all of the structure stuff that doesn't really address the reality that people are people. And yeah, I don't know. For me, it's like change work is always about moving towards the whole. It's like, how do we become more whole? How do we pull ourselves all together? Like, how do we pull the pieces of ourselves together so that the work that we're doing is not just like winning campaigns or winning like small victories, but really about deep transformation. So I guess that's sort of my background. So I've worked in the environmental world for the last 14-ish, 11-ish years, 12 years. I'm currently a manager at the largest and oldest environmental organization in the States, and working primarily this year on our electoral program.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to hear all of that, because I feel like this is also one of the questions I've been in for what feels like a really long time now, like a decade or so, since I was running a small organization working internationally, and I've managed to, I would say, sort of burn myself out almost. And of course, some of that in my sort of kind of healing process myself from that, recognizing that some of that was personal and quite a lot of it was structural. And this whole idea that we make plans and write reports and do lots of activity stuff, and that's what makes us effective change makers, kind of negates not just our well-being but also our experiences of trauma, our real lived experience. And if we can't get back to that, there's always going to be this kind of mismatch of some sort, and this way that I see in the sectors that I've worked in, so many exhausted, passionate people who don't have space to think about their own trauma or well-being.
Yeah. Well, and like we spend so much of our lives doing work, and especially when it's something you're passionate about, like when it's soul work, when it's like this is what I'm called to do, it's your life. And to not be able to be integrated in that space means that we're spending, a significant portion of our waking hours fragmented and floating around.
Yeah, right.
Which I think makes us less effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess what I've also seen is like how we do the work is the work, right? So like we show up with each other is the work. And if we're balls of trauma, like if we're balls of unacknowledged, unmanaged, unloved trauma, then we're cruel to each other.
Yeah.
Like our workspaces are less kind, less gentle places. They're full of resentment. They're full of fear. They're full of anxiety. And we're not doing the world building, like the future world building that we could be doing. Like of opportunities in change spaces to start practicing what the world can be once it's healed.
Yeah, I agree. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear just a bit more about, if we were to do it, like what's your imagination, your vision for that, I guess.
Yeah.
Becoming possible in our practice.
I just have like this, for me, it's like this vision of our little kiddo selves being safe in our workplaces. Like, how do we create spaces that are like fun? And I don't know, for me, it's like fun and happy and like knowing that the work that we're doing is hard and heavy often, it is also joyful and beautiful. And so it's like, how do we shift the way that it feels? And for me as a manager, my role is to, one, understand like the historical context of what a manager is and what my role is in perpetuating harmful capitalistic structures of productivity.
Yeah.
But also like, how am I modeling humanity? Mm-hmm. Creating space to be more vulnerable in a way that doesn't put a burden on the folks that I'm supporting.
Yeah.
Working with folks to set real boundaries, like self-care is boundaries, is like, you don't owe your soul to everybody that you work with.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, I feel like it's a hard journey to learn how much emotional labor is an acceptable amount of emotional labor to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like, as we shift our cultures, at least in my organization, like, we are in a big old change process, and it is messy and hard and painful. And there are times when folks don't need to be a part of every conversation because it's causing harm. Like, sitting in there and not having the power to immediately transform it is causing harm. Like, how do we support folks to say no?
Yeah.
We build cultures that give people permission to say no, to like what does consent in the workplace really look like, especially in hierarchies where power dynamics play out. How do people say no? Are they allowed to say no? How do we change that? Like, how do we shift from expectations of perfection and I don't know. It's like, how do we shift away from you have to be on and good and perfect all the time to like, something terrible is happening in your community and you can't be here and we've got you and that's okay. And if you show up messy, that's okay. We still believe in you and your skills and your power. Like, I guess, yeah, that's sort of my vision, is like that we move beyond individual pain to collective support.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm imagining that would mean like rethinking all the things you talked about, and then also maybe having different practices of relating to each other, you know?
Yeah.
Because right now I think a lot of workplaces, like, there maybe isn't that space to even have the personal conversation, you know, it's just, it's not there, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for the team that I'm on, which is our organizing department, we're trying to shift towards more community of care and vulnerable leadership. And like, so some of that for me is like, how, when I'm coaching my teams, do I have real conversations about like, yes, this is harder because of sexism. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's real. Yes, this is harder because we are in a racist structure.
Yeah.
And people are acting out of that place. Like, this is real and that is harmful and that hurts. So like, how do we work together to stop gaslighting each other into like, professionalism is really some heavy gaslighting. It's like, how do we move away from that into we're collectively responsible for each other and collectively responsible for transforming this culture and building something different.
Yeah.
And what do we have the power to change here?
Within this structure, right?
Within this structure right now in this moment in time, which is a hellscape.
Yeah. And my experience is that actually naming those structures does open up space, and it's not like a solve all, but it does open up some space to be like, all right, there's something else going on here, you know?
Yeah. Which like for me as a white woman feels really important for me to see the structures. Like I have been able to be fairly successful in a patriarchal white culture.
Yeah.
Like I'm in a senior management position. I have been able to navigate this with a fair amount of harm. Like I have some pretty serious health stuff that I'm trying to navigate, which is, I would say, fairly directly connected to navigating white supremacy culture. But I have still been able to like get a pretty well-paid job and have my leadership recognized.
Yeah.
So for me to like make sure that I'm naming what I'm seeing, so that my staff who have less power than I have know that they're like, know that I'm watching it too.
Yeah.
Feels really important to me.
Yeah.
And then we can address it. Like then I can work to navigate it with them, or I don't know, burn it to the ground.
And yeah, and while like naming is definitely not like the only thing, it's like a step that people can start with as well. I think, you know, it's like it's a tangible thing that people can see in the sort of mess.
Yeah.
Of our
well, and it's a starting place. It's like, if we can see it, then let's talk about how we want to navigate it.
Yeah.
That might be switching from I'm responsible for this organization to like, this is my job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like a real conversation about what community support is needed and how do we use our work time to have to like find mentors and care providers and other folks who share identities who can have our backs, so that we can talk about what reality we're in and figure out how to navigate it together. Like,
yeah, I love that. I think it's such a valuable thing to be raising for people, and I think like what you're raising changes and challenges everything. And I often feel like that when I'm talking to, like, I'm basically saying, shall we just rip this up and start again? But at the same time, you've given us some like ways that people can also think about, you know, doing their small piece, and it's like if we can all do some small pieces, it will also shift things.
Yeah. I think the other big thing for me is like me as a sort of middle manager acknowledging what power I do have in the structure, which is like work plans and timesheets and like how people think about their time. So for me, it's like, how do I help the folks that I support like count their hours? Like if you have an emotionally exhausting call that's going to take you an hour to recover from, you're still working. Like recovering from work is still working. You're processing it and you're figuring out how you would navigate it the next time, or do it better, or take care of yourself, sustain yourself for the long haul. That's contributing to the mission, right? Like that's contributing to the long-term work of movements. So how are we claiming that? Like,
I would imagine that very many people listening, when they hear that, would be like, I'm working almost all the time.
Yeah.
Like, you know?
Right. But you can't set real boundaries if you're not acknowledging that.
Yeah,
right. Like, if your off time is not off time, it's processing how intense your work is.
Yeah.
That's still work. So how do we scale ourselves and set our schedules and set our days so that like we're not always in our work, or then also always in our work while also holding our communities, like holding the trauma and pain in our communities and our families. And, you know, it's like, it's too much if we don't count emotional processing as work time.
Yeah, right. And so when people have like a full schedule of meetings all day, they then do the work in the evening, and then the rest of their time awake, they're processing. Then there essentially is no downtime and no space and no, you know,
yeah, which feels so relevant right now, when at least here where COVID has not been handled, period. Everything is online now. Every conversation is online now. Conversations that used to be like a 3 minutes at the water cooler decision are now an hour conference call. And it's like,
it's true, right?
Oh my God, when am I supposed to write that email? I'm either writing that email while I'm on a call, which is so overstimulating,
And not the best either.
Yeah, it's like for folks who are neurodivergent, like who have stimulation, like who get overstimulated, that's like, there go all of my spoons. There goes my whole evening. Like, I don't get to have fun anymore because I have to go black out on my couch and watch reality TV, which is definitely not what I'm doing.
Yeah, and actually, I was thinking just before we came on this call, and it sort of feels like it was the thought came for a reason. Like, I was thinking, I want to ask people, like, if this COVID thing ends and we ever do go back into meeting in person, which may or may not ever happen, how am I ever going to have time to get to a meeting?
I know.
Because, like, I'm struggling to get to the Zoom meeting on time because I'm like, must run downstairs for a coffee and brush my hair or something.
Or like, when do I get to go to the bathroom?
Yeah, and it's just there. Yeah. So, like, if I had to go back to town or something like I used to, when am I going to do that again?
Yeah, I know. It's wild. But I think that's like also a part of like, that is actually agency that we have, right? Okay. That we're trained to not think about having is like, actually, I just put really firm boundaries in my calendar.
Yeah, it is.
Say no to things. And like, if we can build cultures where it's okay to say no.
And also, I used to use that traveling time as almost not downtime, but kind of thinking time, and that's all gone.
Yeah.
So you have to create it in a different way if you're at home most of the time, right?
Yeah.
I'd read a book on the train going somewhere, and that would actually it might be an enjoyment time rather than work time.
Good people watching. Yeah.
People watching, window out the window, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
You're all gone.
Quality space out time, man.
Yeah.
It is actually like our brains need to rest.
Exactly. That's it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know, like at the end of the day, I think for me, it's trauma-informed management is acknowledging the reality that we are not brains separate from our bodies.
Yeah.
And like rooting in the reality that we need more gentleness and authority in our lives. And that especially for folks who have experienced trauma, having agency is not a thing that is that feels comfortable. Like it feels really scary and edgy and like it feels dangerous. Agency feels dangerous. And so as a manager, me learning what my own agency is also about supporting the folks that I am responsible for supporting in understanding that they have a right to have agency, that they have a right to make decisions about their lives, that they are not bad for needing to say no.
Yeah.
And that their entire being does not belong to our organization or the movement. And that having that space actually contributes to us doing world changing.
Yeah, and that's the important thing at the end, right? That actually it's not just boundaries for their own sake, although that's completely valid, but it is actually because that's going to make the work more effective as well.
Like we can't afford to lose organizers and activists and like brilliant beings with the like deep experiences of navigating this world. Like we need everybody. And we need to figure out as a community how to make sure that everybody is like, that we are set up in a way that allows people to continue to show up for their visions and for their dreams, even if all they want to do is stay in bed.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's been a super interesting conversation and really resonates with my work. But I love the way you're framing it and thinking about it in the context of management and in your organization. So thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for giving me a chance to talk about it out loud. I feel like this is like the first time outside of my own little bubble that I'm talking.
I love that. Glad to be of service.
Yeah.
So maybe let's just start by saying who we are. Well, people will know who I am. So Mary Clements, I'm part of the advisory circle that runs this project. But would you like to say who you are?
Okay, my name's Sahagún. I live in Mexico City. And do you want me to do you want me to say what I do, or
yeah, just a little bit about who you are, whatever you'd like to share. Like, yeah,
I feel like maybe like a lot of other people, being in quarantine is sort of giving me a lot more extra time to reflect. And I feel like a little bit in a point of transition or transformation of my work. I have been doing two things a little bit separately. One is supporting movement networks, which means just like big groups of mostly NGOs that are working on some movement related topic. It could be climate justice, water rights, women's rights. And I have been doing that work. I work a lot with the communications technology piece and how to support engagement of these groups that are always working at distance, but wanting to maintain connection and also find new partners or new collaborators, new ideas in their field. And I've been working mostly on that. And there's another piece I've worked on too around organizing wealthy individuals in the United States. The bottom line is to move money toward reparations and decolonization. But there's a lot of inner work that comes with that, how to show up in a good way and trying to redefine some things we've learned about certain words. What does risk mean, for example? And risk, I don't really agree with the dominant definitions of risk. Risk for me entails something like climate change is a big risk. Not talking about climate change in a presidential debate, to me, is like super risky for the entire world. Yeah. So, yeah, that's some of the work that I do.
Awesome. That's really good to know. And then, so we want to have a bit of a chat about trauma-informed Zoom calls, and we were just sharing before we hit record on a bit about what we've noticed, both being people that have worked quite a bit online in the past, around now everyone's working online, and meetings and convenings online can be really different, right?
Yes.
And maybe we could just speak a bit about the way, or maybe just say a bit about what you've seen, and I can share also.
Well, the first thing what I just noticed is that you said that I had like deep breath. Yes, they're different. And that allowed me to remember that, like, I think on a computer and not being in the same space with each other, I think we can forget that we have bodies. And I think like for me, it's really useful for me personally, and I've seen it when I facilitate or share facilitation in a call, to just remember that, okay, we have bodies and those bodies have needs and wants, right? Like deep breaths or stretching. I don't know that it's superhuman to be sitting on a chair all day without moving, right? I think if we do that for a long time, our bodies are not going to like it. So whenever I can, I feel like remembering that we have bodies and bringing that into the call is important. Because I think we have this expectation, okay, just like sit still, don't move, like don't go to the bathroom for like an hour and a half or an hour, and like that's normal. Right?
I'm staring right straight ahead of you at the screen too.
Yeah. It's we have what we've like assumed and kind of maybe in a lot of groups not questioned as normal is really abnormal, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe, or meetings in general where people sit for a long time were probably already abnormal before we came online, but now we're online as well. It's kind of just exacerbated it, I think. Yeah, I said, like, I try to always have some sort of body-based something in a meeting, like even if it is just a stretch, like an invitation to stretch or an invitation to like wiggle your feet, like it could be really simple, right through to something like more of a more of an actual practice of some kind, or you know, some sort of movement or meditative practice or something that really just kind of reminds people like you actually are in your body.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a colleague who both of us have meditation practices, and so a lot of times we would start a call, or if we got stuck in a call, just stop and do like 1, 3, or 5 minutes of meditation. We're normally like 2 or 3 minutes, and it really helps, especially in stuckness. I haven't done it in a group call. There's some with the group call. I feel like there's so much more urgency around time and getting things done, and it almost always 95% of those group calls are like marked by the sense of urgency, and that we don't have enough, and we're never going to finish what we wanted to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me it's often about trying to do it at the beginning, and even for, like you said, like 2-3 minutes. You know, even something also that just reminds people that they can move, you know, that it is all right to like, it's making me think I should do it now.
I know, I know, it makes me
okay. Like we don't have to sit still. You know, that for me, those are like the starters. But we wanted to talk as well about the document that you know, I think did you initiate the co-creation of it? Yeah. Be great to hear a little bit about that, and so we can share it with people also.
Yeah. So at the beginning of quarantine, and this like kind of big, it felt to me like a big event where it's like everybody was just like, what's happening? You know, at the beginning of kind of the first explosions of coronavirus, it occurred to me to host a call around trauma-informed Zoom calls. I am not a specialist on trauma. I've read it, you know, I've read a couple of books. Okay, I could name them, I suppose. The one I think most important one is called My Grandmother's Hands. And there's another one called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
I think there's some resources listed in the document. Those are among them. And being a non-expert, I invited people who joined the call to co-create a document together. It's set up to sort of break out different pieces of a Zoom meeting. So like how to prepare, I'll go through and read the sort of outline of it. How to prepare, kind of creating a container together, grounding people, inviting people in, inviting in people who are showing up quietly or maybe not participating equally, and what to do when trauma shows up, or if the group gets stuck. And so each of us were able to share some of our experiences and things we've learned along the way. It's a Google document, so it is editable, or at the very least commentable. So it's been evolving since that first call.
And people just add in extra resources and stuff. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And I think for people maybe who might be listening, might be thinking, well, what's a trauma-informed Zoom call? Because we kind of talked about the body, and then we kind of maybe jumped to trauma. It just makes me think we should maybe just explore a bit about what do we mean?
Yeah, or why.
Why.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's more acute, right? Trauma has been around and impacts different communities differently. But I think in coronavirus, it's more acute and affecting, right? Like maybe the whole globe of people. Which means that somebody could show up and have had like someone they're close to get sick or worse or die, you know? Like how do we be able to hold what that person's showing up to and not just be like, okay, like come to the meeting, we're getting to the agenda, like gotta get work done, right? What would a different way of operating be?
Yeah.
To me, that's the why. Yeah.
Yeah, that allows you to bring like whatever's going on for you.
Yeah, I mean, even if like I haven't had somebody close to me die, which is luckily the case for me, like I've still had a lot of effects of being in quarantine and having like my life disrupted and everyone I know's life disrupted. Not being able to visit my parents who are older.
Yeah,
You
like
know?
me, the beginning of lockdown just triggered this real anxiety for me that was like a bit messy and a bit like, and you know, working through that has made me really think about like what we're all showing up with in this time is often like for me it's like this anxiety about COVID kind of triggered some trauma that's old, you know, and like this pattern of behavior, like there's this big thing to fear, I've got to protect everyone, you know, just an example of mine, you know. And so even though I also am lucky in that I haven't had like a very close bereavements or anything through this time, I did have this experience of like feeling really kind of wonky for a particular beginning, and I think a lot of people did, you know, in different ways, right?
Yeah.
And then suddenly we're all online and we can't see each other or hug each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, I also want to be clear, like, we're not talking about therapy. We're not saying, okay, all our meetings are our therapy, right? But we're, you know, and that is a resource that people should go to if they need it. Therapy or coaching or any kind of support for mental health and health in general. But we're talking about more, I think the way I see this sort of being able to invite our whole selves into the call instead of this weird compartmentalizing of like, okay, I like put my headphones on and sit down and now I'm like a work machine. And like, right, I forget that I have like shoulders and like a head, you know, and toes and feelings.
Yeah. And for me, like the feelings, whatever they are, whether they're like anxiety or grief or just like not having a great day, like in meetings, if we can bring them even in like, you know, it's like a simple check-in or a simple something, sometimes that's enough to allow us to be present, you know, alongside the permission to like move about or whatever you need, you know. But for me, those things, like they're really simple, you know, we can all do them. They're not, like you said, it's not a big therapeutic thing at all. It's a really simple practice.
Yeah. To be really explicit, I think some of the teams that I've worked with that have been able to do this work consistently of like, creating these calls that feel more human, I would say, are groups that have an explicit agreement to disrupt white supremacy culture, which is the tendency to, right, only do the work, do it in an urgent way. There's a really good list that's included in that document written by Tema Okun and a co-author,
Jones,
Kenneth Jones. Yeah.
Yes.
Just had to go back to that tab. And they outline, for people who aren't familiar with the doc, they outline different ways that white supremacy culture shows up, and then like how to interrupt it and sort of antidotes. And I think groups that have said, okay, we're gonna disrupt this culture, we're gonna notice this culture and we're gonna like try and shift away from it when it happens. And particularly around, I think, urgency has been helpful for me to feel like I can show up, that it's like it immediately creates more space. Has been a starting point, I think.
And all these things we talked about are ways to disrupt, like you said, like those characteristics that they identify. Like I can't remember them all, but they're kind of like perfectionism and you know, right or wrong, aren't they? And they're like they're those kind of things that maybe have made us feel like we're part of a professional bureaucratic system, and that don't let in your whole self, you know, that explicitly try and keep it out.
I mean, and I think what I've been sort of questioning or experimenting with is like how much can we like just completely change this culture, right? Like how much are we like, do we have to participate in this culture because whatever reason? And how much do we like have complete freedom to reimagine how we could be in a relationship? And to me, some of those questions, I guess I'm like taking some leadership from a lot of African-American women in the States who have been doing work around radical imagination, visionary fiction, just kind of questioning all the things, not just questioning, but like also creating and helping others create new ways of being and being in relationship to each other and new structures of power. So how much space do we have in our work, in our meetings, in our relationships to just say, well, hey, this isn't working for me. How would we like to do it? You know?
Yeah. And like, I guess what I'd want people listening to this is like to feel that permission to experiment with that, you know, to maybe push that space that little bit more, whatever that is for them, you know? Yeah. It feels like a good time to do that to me, because everything we thought we had to do, turns out we don't, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot up for question. I think there's a lot up for being able to reimagine or create something new together. Yeah. Cool. So we're going to share the document with people. I also highly recommend My Grandmother's Hands. Talk about it all the time. But so maybe worth saying to people that that's also about healing racialized trauma in the body, and has like applicability for people of all bodies in different ways. So it's a really valuable book to go get one. What do they say? Run, don't walk. Or just download it on any device on your Kindle.
True. True. Thank you so much for sharing a bit with me about the resource, and we'll share it with people and hope it inspires them to create some change in their own practice too.
Yeah.